Just so you know, your mute's still on for the meeting room.
Get in place. It's a little bit of a, we're trying to fly the plane as we build it, but that's just the nature of it. So really the intent of this week's meeting is to present you with a final budget that would get approved by the board in September. That gives you time to ask any questions or concerns you have on the line items. You can then direct back to staff so we can make those changes as appropriate. Take August and September, you would approve the final budget for the coming year. So if you're good with it, Commissioner, we could move to item B, review of the proposed 23-24 final budget.
Yes,
okay.
Go ahead and do that.
Yep, thank you. One note, generally monthly, I also give you a year-to-date on the current budget due to the fact that we're only 25 days in and so many of those items get moved between the last fiscal year and the current fiscal, it just doesn't hold much value. So skip that today so we can spend a little more time going through the whole year.
Sure.
So I'll take this line item by line item unless you have any thoughts on another way you want to do it. But what you have before you on, Carolina, give me the page numbers. I have a, it's okay, I got it right here. 17, 18, 19, or if you have it, I try to put it on a legal size so it's a little easier to read. I did a couple things. I gave you our 5-year average budget. Again, that's going to be a little skewed because of inflation, so we'll be a little higher. Last year's is just not a good representation yet because it's not closed out. And I gave you the last 2 budgeted years for reference. The recommendation is that we stick to the ADA projection from Mono County from our tax revenue side. Generally, that's been a fairly conservative number, honestly, but that's on the years coming up. If you get too aggressive on it, then if you end up having some kind of fall, then you can be behind the curveball. With the intent that we really start focusing on any money that we have left over and appropriately placing that. So that would put us about 300,000 above last year's budget and is just shy of 4 million. Moving down, I've made some slight adjustments. The falling and miscellaneous fees I just brought to the 5-year average, just due to the fact that those have been high the last few years because we were going through a building boom, which is primarily Interwest fees. So that's probably a little more representative of what we've been seeing. Contributions stayed the same. That's a general contribution that we received from a family that we helped out on a fire down by Owens Valley. Diff revenue. So one of the things I have done is, and I'm calling this essentially our general fund just because that's a standard that most people are used to in this community. We've called it our operating budget before, but development impact fees are for capital expenditures. And we've been getting some returns because what the district did, and this got vetted through legal, we made some purchases prior to getting those fees in, essentially the big ones being the ladder truck and the fire station, and the DIP fees have been paying that back now. You know, the right way for that to occur is that those funds are going back into the capital expenditure fund, which had paid for that apparatus. So it does a couple things. It puts the money where it needs to be, which is paying for capital expenditures. It also helps keep the budget a little more even. Last year we ended up actually bringing in a significant amount of DIP fees because we hadn't collected them in a few years. That was a recommendation also from the company. That's, if you sit on a whole bunch of DIP fees, people are going to make the argument that you don't actually need them. So last year's we ended up having $760,000 transferred, and I think that's an important thing to be aware of as well, because we're still only putting about 250,000 in our capital replacement. But there's things like that 760. We ended up putting over $1 million in our capital replacement last year, so we're helping get those reserves to where they need to be. Rent with the paramedic has been generous. None of them are here, so that has been traditionally what we've had. Mono County Chiefs, we receive a small portion from them. I was just appointed as the president of the Mono County Chiefs Association. That's a position the district has held generally in the past. They wanted to run things through some smaller districts for a little bit, but then they return that back to the district. So it does add a little bit of responsibility, but I think it's the rightful place for this district and the community. So that's that. For assistance for hire, one of the things is as we build out our wildland program, we need to make sure we're having a good idea of what that program's costing and what it's bringing in as well. So assistance for hire has traditionally been, there are some exceptions such as COVID and that sort of thing, but for the most part, it represents going out on wildland incidents and helping other communities. So what I did is I placed our 5-year average on the revenue side. Honestly, hoping and expecting that grows as we make an attempt to actually get out of the district a little more and support with things like our Cal OES engine. I spoke with Cal Fire today on how to make sure that they're thinking of us when they're asking for resources. So it's important that we include those revenues as we look at the expenses on the wildland program side. Right now it's being funded with some district money, hopefully some assistance from hire, as well as some grant funding. So I did want that reflected in the budget. And then ambulance income I brought into our 5-year average. We have been running quite a few ambulance calls. We're honestly, running an ambulance is not a profitable venture, as you probably read in the sheet the other day, and those numbers were actually fairly inaccurate from my understanding of that. And we do have to update our fee schedule when we get a chance, but just trying to reflect the last 5 years. So that brings another 154,000 in. I have 30,000 for interest, just reflecting kind of what we're receiving out of our life account right now. I did add the WUI grant, or a portion of that, into our annual operating. And this was after some discussions with town finance. The WUI grant that Chief Morrow and Chief Rooks worked on has multiple components. It has the ability to purchase a Bobcat, which is a capital expenditure. It has some funding for CEQA and NEPA work, which is things we have to do as we work on these projects. But it also has a portion that reimburses the district for employee costs for a wildland program. So what I did is I took that portion of employee costs. That whole grant was about 588,000. The portion that was for employee costs was about 360,000. Took that, split into 3 years, and I put that piece in. The town practice has been that if it's going towards your operating costs, and those grants should be noted there, because again, we're trying to figure out, what is this wildland program doing for us? So currently, if you take that 62,000, that 122,000, it's a large portion of how we intend to fund that wildland program. The group has been out chipping every day for the last several weeks since we got the chipping program up and running. A good portion of that is funded by that grant. So again, just trying to make sure that we're aligning those items. That brings our total expected revenue, again, conservatively at 4.3 million. Any questions I can answer on the income side? Yep. If not, I'll keep moving. And again, we do have the opportunity to take the August meeting to again dig into these. My goal was that we concentrate on the general fund this week. We look at some kind of more global policies and capital placement stuff next month in August. September, we do the final budget, depending on what you need changed. So moving on to the next section on, I think it's page 18. Personnel costs are obviously the largest chunk of department costs. For a lot of departments, they're 90% of the budget. Ours are a little smaller, but they're still substantial. There's a little bit of a moving target on the wages, and I'll explain why, but there's some structural changes that we're making. And again, and these are fairly conservative. So a couple things I did is make sure that we include any step increases that are occurring for employees, as well as the 4.5% COLA that the board approved last month. One of the items to consider is about a year ago, we had 4 full-time personnel. We had Gilbert, Tyson, Jordan, and Danny. We ended up losing Jordan and Danny in the last 6 months. With Jordan's position, I felt that there's a pro and con to this, but the value of a wildland program, we essentially couldn't afford both at the same time. We could either have that 4th full-timer or build out a wildland program. one of the things about a wildland program is you have to go in with some initial investment. You can't start it with one or two people. So there was a kind of a minimum threshold that we had to hit. And I felt that 6 individuals was kind of the limit on that. So what we're doing from the staff side is Danny's inspector position will still report to Chief Morrow, but will be a 40-hour position, which is traditionally kind of what that's been under Brett Reed, to make sure we have that coverage, we have that continuity of availability for the public Monday through Thursday. Our goal is to add a Friday, what we call it was called a Fix It Friday position. We've had it for quite a few years. I think it's the first job I worked under Chief Brooks when I first got here. I put all the chainsaw chains on backwards. He almost fired me, but he kept me. But it's a great spot for people that are interested into getting into the fire service. And it's a spot that we can get somebody in to work on some of the things that we're just not catching up to operationally. So the goal would be to have a Monday through Thursday kind of primarily inspector position, but really kind of, helping out with EMS and a couple other things, having a Fix It Friday position, and then being able to continue our wildland program. And that's essentially what's reflected in these wages categories. So what you're going to see is that I'm asking that we keep the full-time budget same as last year. There's a couple reasons from that. We will be moving from 4 to 3. One of the things that I believe the association has to renegotiate is we have a system called LTAP. The intent on it, I think, was very strong. It was very good. But what we essentially do is someone like Tyson is considered an LTAP 2, LTAP 1. Gilbert's considered an LTAP 2. The theory was, and I'm a big believer that a big part of their job is administrative, but the theory was that they would have to meet these thresholds to move up to LTAP 3 and that sort of thing. They've also moved up. Both Gilbert and Tyson serve as captains today. Based on our pay structure, they're not paid as captains. They're paid at a lower rate than our part-time captains. So I don't like that system. It's in our contract currently. I think that's something we have to fix to make it equitable for them. So I do see some fluctuations in that category. Again, we will bring in another individual into that category. I foresee that I probably budget a little on the high side, but again, just being conservative, there's just not room for 4, but there's a little more room than 3 there. The part-time wages are, again, an incredibly difficult moving target right now because a lot of that is a reflection of this last year. I believe we are at 901 calls to date. Yesterday, we used to finish at about 700. So just the operational costs of running this place have been significant. It's hard for me to know if that is primarily due to the storm incidents we had and how much of it is due to increases in marketing and just kind of a new norm for us. So I believe that that's a relatively appropriate increase there. And also, budgeting for things like that Fix It Friday positions, looking at maybe do we add some night engineer positions. I know that that's been something that we've discussed we've had a hard time for people wanting to promote out of the firefighter position because the shift schedule is really nice. If you're a captain or an engineer, you can only work the 24 hours on the weekend. So it just gives us a little bit of flexibility as we move forward to really sit down with the association and figure out what works well to try to add some of that staffing capacity. And then the last large wage item is the wildland program. So this was historically called extra help. It will still include Chief Brooks's. He's been supporting the wildland program, so he will be in there, as well as the general wildland program wage costs. I did look into having the wage just be a completely separate item. The problem is for our CPA that he uses this personnel cost for a lot of our tax forms and that sort of thing. So the easiest thing from that perspective was to leave it in there. If you look at it, we used to budget about 60,000 in there. We're at 240,000. If you take the grant funding and some expectation of assistance for hire, that's how we're making this balance. One thing to think about is what this program is providing us is originally it was going to be 6 people for 7 months. When we lost Danny, we ended up adding a 7th person who had been next on the list. We're helping cover 31 with it right now. I know we need more help kind of across the board. The nice thing about wildland is it grows the pie. We should be able to start working on projects around the community that we can get reimbursed for if there's RFPs going out for thinning projects and that sort of thing. Like the CAL FIRE grant is an example of that. We can also work on getting them out of district. So again, it is trying to grow our revenue pie. It a common number that gets looked at when you're trying to make comparisons on personal costs is FTEs, or full-time equivalents. If you look at 7 people times 7 months, it comes out to about 4.1 FTEs. So if they're spread out over a whole year, it'll be about the same as 4 employees. The way that we're doing that is, one is part of the concessions, honestly, on how we staff this, recognizing that for this group that's sitting here, there's a little bit of gamble on their side as well. It's very similar to a Forest Service job. There's years where you're just kind of working and training and gaining experience, and then there's some years where you're out all summer. It's been a quiet start for our first year, which has actually been beneficial from an experience perspective, but it's starting to pick up. Chief Walker's leaving for Shasta, so they're having their traditional fire actually started yesterday, as every time he goes to Shasta, it tends to burn. So I do expect the fire season to pick up. But again, the thought process on this wildland program is we're gaining the equivalent of 4 people. We don't have them all the time. We're gonna have to send them out of district, but it does help us with that staff capacity, if that makes sense. I know there's a lot of things built into that. So any questions on that concept? Okay, if not, I'll keep moving down. Overtime I left at last year's. I do honestly expect overtime to fall a little bit. A lot of that was due to the spring that we had. So, but I did keep it budgeted as I saw. Employee retirement PERS. So this one is essentially kind of actual costs that we predict. One thing that's worth noting is, so the district provides retirement in 2 separate ways. You have your employees that are in PERS, and you have your employees who are not in PERS. We reached a side letter agreement with the association where they are picking up a portion of their PERS from the employer side. And what that allows us to do is bring people over that 1,000-hour threshold without having a large impact on our overall budget. So we'll start paying them PERS costs, but they're picking up a portion of those, and we're not going to be paying Social Security costs. So there is a 2% increase for the district. It was a little bit of a give and take on where we got to. But what it allows us to do is, we've been held at this 1,000-hour threshold. Now we have the opportunity to break that. We have 2 captains that are working over that right now. I foresee all of the people that are sitting in front of us potentially to get over the 1,000-hour threshold. And again, it's not just the work capacity, it's also the experience. We're putting a ton of time and effort into training this group in front of us. We're going to attempt to send them out on wildland fires. We want to make sure we're utilizing them as well. So when we were cutting them off at 1,000 hours, it not only was they weren't happy about it because they had to stop working essentially. For us, we've had quite a few employees who just said, hey, you can't come in for the next 3 months. But it allows us to keep working them, both for their benefits and the district, in my opinion. So what you might end up seeing is the PERS number will be a little higher, but it should be correspondingly lower with the payroll tax side. So it's going to balance out. That also includes our UAL payments, which was $218,000. That is currently based off PERS projection. They have what they call a smoothing curve to pay for previous errors that they made in calculations. We're essentially at what they see as the peak. Is that true? It's debatable. I'd say we're probably more at a plateau, but we did have a period here where we're seeing that number increase pretty significantly over the last couple of years. I would say it's going to most likely plateau at this point, although PERS is saying it's going to go down. A lot of that has to do with things such as new employees are brought in under PEPRA, under different settings, so that there's a better actuarial understanding of what that employee is going to cost. Moving down, the 401A and the volunteer incentives are essentially staying the same. Health insurance and vision. So a couple things, there is an increase there. Again, one of the things of bringing employees on at that point, the threshold is 1,500 hours, is you have to pick up healthcare costs. So for the wildland program, there is again a compromise side letter. What we see in our healthcare costs is the reduction of 1 full-time staff with the addition of 7 wildland staff. What they're receiving is, for that period they work, once they become eligible, then for that next period, we give them $500 towards healthcare. They just have to show proof of healthcare. So it's about $6,000 per employee per year, but it allows them to work over again one of those thresholds. So that's representative of the costs there. Our workers' comp, I'm sure you're familiar. It's currently projected at $178,000. Again, this was a frustrating one because we had a lower quote from SDRMA. They just wouldn't let us exit the contract. As soon as I have some time, my goal is to meet with their new executive director and see if we can exit at the end of this year. They had a quasi-valid argument that we had asked to exit late last time, and that's because SDRMA didn't give us a quote till late. Generally, under the old JPA, we had the opportunity to exit every year. The new JPA forces you to stay in a 3-year contract, as you're familiar with many of our other contracts. I think we have a valid argument for exiting, so I'm going to make that with the executive director. The old executive director seemed amendable to it, so we'll see what happens with that. Payroll taxes are held as current, again, with, we expect, a little bit of rise, but also a decrease with PERS. The volunteer incentives I held as the same. Incident response, this one is, again, another difficult category to capture. This last year, we moved the people from, they were half volunteer, half paid, and we were in kind of a precarious legal position, so the decision was made to pay people hourly. What that meant is we paid people for coming in on incidents, which I think was very helpful through the incidents that we've had. I think we're putting our money where we need it. The difficult thing is that category in the past has reflected check night, which goes backwards in time and captures everything from the previous year in November. So this last year ended up being off in the sense that we were capturing all the previous year. We're also capturing this year at an hourly rate at a higher rate. And we also are at 900 calls. We should be sitting at half of that. So it's difficult to make a good assessment of what that number is, but I think 150,000 is fairly conservative. Again, our number one job here is to be putting, 14 people on a small fire, 22 to 26 people on a large fire. And this is where that comes from. So I think it's, money well spent. It's my best guess at what that's going to cost. I ended up renaming the two categories here just to keep it a little clearer. It used to be called volunteer captains and volunteer firefighters. It's now incident response. And then I did keep the volunteer firefighters for Volunteer Firefighter Academy. Our academy still is volunteer, and we are still going to keep check night. It's an important tradition, so we want to make sure that that's captured in the budget. We currently have 10 members, unless Tyson speaks otherwise. They're in good standing, so we foresee that cost being about $15,000. That takes us through the bulk of personnel costs. Any questions I can answer on personnel? Okay, I'll just keep moving along. Legal, I bumped up a little bit. Our 5-year average is at 23, but we've had quite a few things that we just been taking to legal. So looking at last year's, again, it's not closed out, but I thought it was appropriate to bump it up a little bit to reflect our current legal costs. I bumped it up by 2,000. I've kept our audit at about 10,000. I'm sorry, our accounting and our auditor at their current rates of 10 and 12,000. Did see a slight increase in those, but those are fairly aligned. Miscellaneous consulting, I kept that at last year's budget amount. I have to circle back. I know there were some costs for the recruitment and hiring for my position. I believe that that's not been paid yet. That's why Chief Rival had kept that number in there. So I just want to make sure that that's current, but that's kept at the current rate. Publications we kept at 12,000. I did bump up uniforms and clothing. One of the things that was interesting is when we had all these other fire departments come up, the first thing they asked for is they went over to Kittredge and bought snowshoes for their people. Those are gear that we just honestly don't provide. And there's things that we're just a little behind on. We can't just do a bulk, and even Cal OES kind of went back and said, hey, okay, there has to be a reasonable approach on this. You absolutely need the appropriate PPE and safety gear, but we need to get there. So this increase is just a recognition that over time, we're probably gonna have to provide a little bit more of clothing and uniform equipment for our personnel. We got them some work jackets last year. I can see things like boots down the line being appropriate, but it will be kind of an incremental thing as opposed to just jumping in. So that is why that's bumped up. Food, incredibly hard to capture again. This last year was very high, but we also fed half of CAL FIRE here for 2 months. So The reality is 25 is probably right in line where we would be with increases in inflation and where I foresee that. So a small bump up, hopefully it's a good amount. Moving down, insurance liability. This is our current cost. I know that was a frustrating category for us this list year, but this is directly from SDRMA and it's in line with what we paid last year. Membership stayed at 9,000. I did slightly bump down transportation and travel, really with the intent that we take a look at how we're doing a lot of our training. We used to send quite a few people out of house. What you find is that there ends up, if I send, say, Gilbert out, I still have to pay him for his 24 is here, I have to pay him for he's gone, I pay him for another 24. There's a whole bunch of costs. Then I have to cover his shifts, and then I also have to pay per diem. So it's important. We got to give Gilbert that training, but what we found is it better bringing instructors in here. And we've done quite a few classes in the spring where we've made them open to anybody that wants to attend them. It's part of the reason some of our costs have been a little higher. But our last driver operator class had 10 people in it. I'm not sure how many our last engine boss and crew boss had 13 to 15 people. So it really helps us get these classes at a value, a little bit less in travel costs, and I'll hit on the training side as well. The other side is we've reached out to Cal OES, and they've been supporting us by bringing in instructors that Cal OES pays for. So what we're really trying to do is have kind of a spring training session and a fall training session in times that have been historically shoulder seasons. There are no more shoulder seasons, but we're still attempting to follow that model. Any questions on admin expenses? I'll just keep moving through on kind of our logistics, fleet and equipment. I've really tried to take a look at our costs, especially on the 5-year, and make sure we're capturing costs there. So safety gear, PPE, if you look at our 5-year average, it was closer to 32,000, so I bumped that one up. Comms and radios, we've gone above the average, and we've been about 15. Last year, we bumped it up to 25. There's quite a bit that's occurring in comms and radios. A lot of that is more from the capital expenditure side. So Jeff will speak a little bit about the Chris program that will hopefully be up and running this fall, where that is a multi-million-dollar program that we're working with the county and the city on. There will be some costs associated with what goes above and beyond. Initially, the district had budgeted about $350,000 towards a repeater, and I expected probably another $350,000 towards mobiles and handhelds. Fortunately, a lot of that is being covered by the funding that the county was able to secure. There will still be some overages that we'll have to work out, but it's going to be significantly below the $700,000 amount. And we'll be capturing that as those costs come in from the capital expenditure side. It is important, though, as this happens, we're still going to have batteries. We're going to have, a few years ago, I sent a radio through a snow blower. Those things just happen. So having some sort of capital replacement fund on a general year is important as well. So because we're moving into a new system, I see that being a little higher with 25,000 there. Buildings and grounds, we're keeping at last year's. Did increase medical supplies up slightly just due to, honestly, just cost and what we've seen over the last 5 years again. Computer supplies held at what we had. IT support as well for last year's. We're still trying to work out a records management system. There's a couple things that are changing in Firehouse. We don't know exactly where we're going to end up. So while we didn't hit those costs last year, I foresee those costs not going away. Small tools and equipment. I'm a big believer that we just need to keep these things updated. We're going to get to thermal imaging cameras a little later in the budget. One of the thermal imaging cameras was relatively new, but the batteries are not replaceable anymore. So that one is unfortunately not useful. We have 2 other thermal imaging cameras that have been here longer than I have, I'm pretty sure. So they're at least 24 years on the department. They're pretty good if they've lasted that long, but it's time that those things get updated, and we have similar things and things like airbags. We just want to make sure we're updating on a regular basis. This last year, we put quite a bit into updating our saws. So making sure that we're moving everything towards steel and have, a reliable steel setup, and all of our rigs are essentially set up the same. So want to keep that process going and add a little bit more funding to that category. Hydrants is, this number is probably not going to cover hydrants, but the reality is that a lot of that should be getting refunded from the March incidents. So we do foresee quite a bit of cost there, but hopefully those will come back. Equipment maintenance, I kept at last year's 108, and certification at 4,000.
Which apparatus have to be certified this year? Which apparatus are these? Just the trucks, both trucks?
We certify both trucks every year since Tree Free Law started that policy. Any questions on logistics or fleet? Okay, so moving on to prevention, I kept the funding with the Fire Safe Council. They've been essentially non-existent. We helped them transfer some of their grant work over to White Bark. I did receive a call yesterday from somebody who's interested in getting that group up and running. So we're taking an attempt at rebuilding the Fire Safe Council and probably looking at, what are they good at and what can they bring in and what are they just not good at? I mean, part of it is they're not good at operating grants. They just don't have the staff capacity. But there are certain things that they can do. They can go out for grants. They work jointly with groups such as ourselves. White Bark, the county just brought on Wendy. So I think there's still a role in place for them. I want to make sure we provide funding for that, but it's still being worked out. Prevention and education is at 24,000, which is reflective of the last 5 years and last year's budget. It's again going to be tied to our permit process. The town has seen a slowdown moving forward in the permit process. Whatever you can take that at, it's difficult to say because there's a couple of things going on there. Any questions on prevention? Okay. Training, I kept the medical exams and DOT at the current rates. I did slightly decrease training. We had been at 95 or 80 and at 75. Again, reflective of the fact that we're going to try to do more training in-house, and we're going to try to bring Cal OES to teach classes. They're doing a ICS 300 class for us in October, just as an example. That's a class that would typically cost us $12,000 to $15,000. So there'll still be some cost, but not at the same level. For utilities, what I did is basically an across the board, I believe 10% hike, just to reflect that inflation is still incredibly hard to capture. What you see there is both the 5-year as well as last year's numbers. Looking back on last year's budget, I think this one is fairly stable, although they're not all completely done yet. We budgeted 149, came in at 145. So this would put us at 164. Sometimes the town doesn't end up getting us receipts for a few months there, so it's hard to know exactly where it ended up, but I don't see gasoline being much cheaper, and propane's in the same boat, so I think that that's a relatively appropriate number. I did take the Mona County admin charge and bring it down slightly. That's the highest number that we've seen in the last 5 years. The county went through and purchased a new software a few years back that helps them with their property assessment. So they've been seeing their costs go down. Those costs are, in theory, directly then passed on to us. So that should be a fairly conservative number for what we see. What that does is puts us at 4.3 million on the expense side and brings us in basically budget neutral. I will say this is a conservative budget because I think the ABA projections are fairly conservative. I try to be conservative on the wages as well. And again, with the goal being that we do take a look at the savings. Unfortunately, we don't see it for a little bit, but as soon as we close out the audit for last year, we take that money and then use it towards appropriate funding for whatever the board sees. So again, the goal here is, this is what I'm recommending for September, and Caroline reminded me I missed the month. Turns out August also exists, but what that gives us is, if you have any staff direction, you can provide it now. You can also provide it in August. September is when we have to vote on the final budget for this fiscal year. Any questions on that?
Yeah, Chief, I just have a couple of comments.
Yep.
So with regard to income,
Yep.
and you've done a good job of aligning expenses with income, which is good. I guess I would be my comment is really about sort of one-time income items
Mhm.
that we not build a budget around. So, a WUI grant, for example, we get it this year and we built the budget on that. But fundamentally next year that could go away. Budget's going to go down, 120 grand. If you look at income assistance for hire, or you look at property taxes, stuff like that. So I guess the overall comment I have for you, and appreciative of all the work you've done here, is as follows. Number one, are we doing enough for replacement fund? We've got a tailwind because we took what reserves we have, paid off the station, but we're not paying that back anywhere. Which, if we had any sort of significant facility failure, we're SOL basically, right? Or we'd have to dip into repair and replacement. And I guess that reserve piece is what sort of bothers me a little bit. I don't know, I don't have an exact answer for it, but to some degree, I'd almost like to see, Station 1 lease payment convert to Station 1 maintenance fund or something that would allow us, because right now we're living on sort of a borrowed benefit.
Yes.
That-
and no. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's great. We don't have any rent.
Okay.
But we also have no
Agreed.
backup
Okay.
for what happens. So I guess I would look at what does that mean on a monthly basis, budget basis, and I know that that's going to have to rejigger some other things, but I just don't want to lure ourselves into a false sense of security that, given one-time things and no maintenance fund, not enough repair replacement fund, we get ourselves in a trick bag because we align expenses then with a false sort of income balance that's unsustainable.
So yeah, and great questions. I think there's actually a couple of questions there. So the first one is on the grants and the assistance for hire. I kind of struggle with this one because Chief Preval's thoughts is that there's a non-grant. And again, I work with the town on it. The thought process here is a big part of making the wildland program sustainable. If you look at North Tahoe and Incline, which is kind of a model one that quite a few people look at, 90% of that program is funded outside of their general fund. So it's coming from grants, and it's coming from assistance for hire. So what I don't want to do is have this giant program that's sitting in our operational budget and then hide all the revenue that's coming in. So, I think that's one. You're right in the sense that this grant's not there, but if we're doing the job right, the only way it's sustainable long-term is we are picking up RFPs that are coming from White Bark to be doing so.
Fully agree with you. I guess the question is, we need that proof of concept, because if you look at prior years, it's 0, 0, 0, 0, and now all of a sudden we get this money. That's fine. If we had 2 years under our belt or something like that, where we have a consistency.
And so
I agree with you.
So what I would say is the assistance for hire, the proof of concepts there is I use the 5-year action. So even when we were not attempting to get out, the reality is we were getting out. So now that we have a program and we're reaching out to the state, we're reaching out to CAL FIRE, at some point you have to take that step and that risk and believe that you're going to get out. It's still fairly conservative in how we're doing it, but I do believe that there will be a funding mechanism coming from getting out and running fires.
Which is fine.
On the grant side, what I ended up doing is it's a 3-year grant, and I just took the employee cost piece. I pulled out all the other pieces. Those would get recognized on the capital side because it includes things like I'm probably wrong on this, but about $110,000 Bobcat with attachments. Those shouldn't be in there. Like, this really should be like, what do we have? With the goal that if we're doing this right, I'll give you another example. Chief Brooks and Acting Captain Fox and I went to the Chamber of Commerce on last week. I had a discussion with Southern California Edison there. In Tahoe, they paid for an engine company to go out and do the work around power lines and they pay for them for an engine and a tender. In order for us to fund this wildland program, I do think that we need to go out for an assessment. I think that wildland is something that this district was just not, when it was formed, 50 plus years ago, was just not the issue that it is today. So I believe that is a portion, but I also believe that we have a responsibility to actively go out for this work that exists in the community. I can't think of a better workforce than our people. The reality is, to get to something larger than the 7 you have sitting here, to get to ideally 15 to 20, you have to pick up those projects. We can't.
Well, and it's asset utilization. at that point, right?
Exactly.
I mean, otherwise, we have a museum of highly maintained.
Yes, and very
functional
polished
vehicles
rigs
that never get used, right?
Yeah, and so the goal is to gain their experience, use them to make the district safer, get them out so that they're picking up that experience and coming back. But it did require a little bit of a change in this. I had considered making wildland program just a completely separate category, keeping it separate from everything else. Again, with our CPA, it would throw off some of his numbers. So I can make sure I'm including reports on that as well. To answer your other question, that one's a little more nuanced and complicated. And I run this balance between being too fiscally conservative and not giving the district the resources that it needs
Right.
to do business, and making sure that we are also providing for the future. Frank was very conservative. I think what you're going to find is, so I agree that we don't have, this 250 does not represent a number that I think is realistic of what our capital expenditures are.
And that's my concern.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And so,
I mean,
and I'm
because we're
aware of
just-
that. And so, and I guess to finish that conversation, we can do this a couple different ways. There's no right answer on budgeting. I ended up running those numbers. Chief Brooks was doing it just as a side little hobby because that's just the type of person he is. We both ended up, and just a good rough number, in my opinion, is 10%. We should be putting about 10% of our budget away every year towards capital expenditures, which if you look, we're at 4.3, we really should be putting 430,000 into that. I agree that we don't want to do it through one-time funding, but my goal is, assuming I make it through my contract, the longer that starts to align over time,
Sure.
recognizing that if I did it today, I would have to make cuts to programs that I don't want to see and actually don't think are necessary, in the sense that as we get more comfortable with the budget, when we bring back that audit, we're going to find that we probably came out about 400,000 in the green on revenue that year. It's hard because we have quite a few fluctuations year to year that, changes in costs for personnel, COVID, storm cycles. But generally, we've been running fairly conservative budgets. And the intent is that that money gets put somewhere. So my goal is, when we get that audit, we take that 400,000 and we put it towards capital reserves. We put it towards, there is, again, this is a policy discussion. I'll give you my opinion on it, but we need to have a housing solution here. We are the only public organization that currently doesn't have some sort of housing solution for their employees. And the reality is, it's more important that they're sitting in town than that the civil engineer is sitting in town. The water district actually has a significance. So there's a hospital. We can't have a same-day fire service. So those are things. Chief Brevault and I have both been beneficiaries of a smaller housing program. I believe he got 50,000 towards his first down payment. I received 25. His is just going to go right back into the housing fund. He sold his house. We need to set something up so that we're taking care of holding on to our employees in the community.
Well, and I guess to your point, the 5-year average accrued 604,000 ordinary income. I don't need to know the answer, but where did that go? Right.
Yes. Great.
And then last year, 104,000 ordinary income. Where did that go?
Sure. And one of the things that's very difficult is this number is, and this is one of the difficulties of working within QuickBooks. It's not accurate in the sense that it doesn't include, for example, both on the positive, on the negative. This doesn't include the FEMA money that came in for Chief Brooks. That was at 100,000 in the positive. It also, because Bill has to do kind of a little bit of an accounting trick, that 250 also ends up getting put on the other side of the equation to make things balance, which you don't see in this number here. So it can look a little more positive. And so what I found is, I'm not comfortable with the budgets to make that assumption of what we actually end up till I get that audit back. The audit ends up being the most accurate. And you're right, you know, it's not 600, but there is something coming back that we should be appropriately.
Well, because I
Budgeting.
mean, two things, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
imagine I'm sitting on your side of the table now, Tyson, for a second. If I'm in the association, I'm gonna say, well, okay, you guys are running a $4 million budget with a $600,000 surplus. How come I got to fight for a 2% raise or 4% raise or everything else? And the time to make that number accurate is not when we have to, right? When we go, whoa, you can't look at this, right? Well, what do I look at? What would you look at?
And that's come up in previous
And
negotiations.
on the flip side, you know, I would love to see a plan over the next 5 years to get to that 10% repair and replacement.
Absolutely.
You decide. I don't think it needs to go from, you know, what it is now to 10% next year. But I think some kind of ramp as opposed to continuing to hockey stick this makes me uncomfortable. So I just, you know, short of some, I mean, you know, whatever, a roof collapse, a fire, something here, then suddenly we've got a $500,000 expenditure. We don't know where it's going to come from.
Yeah.
You know, or if we weren't insured for the sprung structure, there's another couple $100,000 out of our budget, which we can ill afford. Right. So just belt and suspenders. We can always go and say, hey, we're overfunded in capital expenditure this year. We're not putting anything in. But it's tough to go back and go, whoa. You know, we need to go back and draw some of that money out, because once you spend it, it's gone. So.
And so what I've been trying to do is kind of keep the plane moving forward at what everybody expects and knows. Absolutely. Here, and also preparing for that process.
Yep.
And the first part of that, in my opinion, is policies. So what I'm going to present the group with is we should have X reserve policy, which is for both. There's multiple portions of that. This is what exists in every, and some of it is just staff capacity, right? We don't have, you know, these are things that should get knocked out fairly quickly if you don't have chiefs that are also running incidents, if they're just administrative and they have a finance department. But the goal is that we have basically a capital replacement reserve separate from an operating reserve.
I was just going to say the operating reserve is relatively easy. There's enough stuff out there that says you got to have 6 months operating reserve or whatever. Pick a number, but you got to work.
And it's important for us because we have cash flow issues due to the way that we receive our revenue. So that's all coming. I was hesitant to make significant changes too quickly, but yeah, my timeline is honestly less than 5 years. I'd like to see, you know, the replacement fund sitting at 10%. And part of that is taking a look at what our replacement schedule is, what things look like there, and also make sure that we have the operating reserve and a housing reserve. Yeah, I believe that is something
I agree. And all that has to get in there, because if we needed to take an action on housing tomorrow, we're kind of hamstrung.
Yes.
Right. Because where are we going to take it from?
And the argument is, you know, what we've done in the past is what we're running is basically a very large fund balance. And that's what the town does that, but not at the level that we do, which is basically you need to have some amount of, you know, the budget is 4.3 million, but you have 4.8 in the bank based off money that got brought over the previous year, and it funds for things that were unaccounted for. Right. If you have to go above that, you go into your reserve. So right now, for multiple reasons, one is just due to the fact that we're trying to do things in QuickBooks. There is value in that. I mean, I agree with Roger. I don't want to pay a CPA $60,000 and go get a accounting software that costs another $30,000, and then I just lost the $100,000 when frankly Bill Green does this first for about $7,000. It just makes my job a little harder and make sure that I'm keeping us on the right place. So the goal is to get the policies in place, be keeping up on those on an annual basis, and then to move these towards where we believe they need to be. But I'm in line with you as far as
and then work
expectations.
Okay.
Are there any more questions on budget? Move on into the whole business.
Yes, so I did go back and forth with props and measures. They did present me with a contract that I think is aligned with what we had discussed in the last staff meeting. The other direction that we had received from the board is to work out things with the association. Doesn't make sense to spend money if we haven't worked out kind of our internal deliberations. So some of this is on me. I was on vacation for a couple weeks. Some of it is good
Shame
to
on
go be getting Michael and a couple people together. But we did reach next Thursday is our admin night. I'm going to do a state of the district for the whole department and really make the case for why I believe that this measure should move forward and give the group a chance to, respond and give me their thoughts on where we're going with it. With the intent that we have that association, willingness to look at this. There's still going to be a need to get a smaller group together. I would recommend once we get that process done that we take 2 board members. Commissioner Curry was very involved in the last one. He did a great one to sit in on something like that. But again, kind of add a couple board members, some members from the administrative staff, and some association members, a couple part-time, a couple from the wildland program. This measure should be an alignment of what the community needs, what the district needs, and what the employees need. And that's just reality. Is we should be able to get there, and that's one of the steps that we need to take to move forward. So my goal is to get that process again next Thursday moving with the intent that we have that kind of internal buy-in, and then I present the contract to the board the following month in August. So holding off on it right now until we have that sorted. I don't foresee us not getting there, but I don't want to get ahead of our ducks either. So
Table this until next meeting.
I do want to mention, I had a conversation with Mayor Wentworth about this, and he said that, when we do deliberate the contract, he's happy to come because he did have some experience with the Measure R, it was a while back now, but just in terms of what they paid and what they got.
Okay.
So I think, and he's also reiterated his willingness to.
great. Yeah, and that's the level of support that we need to have a different outcome this third time. So that's appreciated. It'll come up later in the agenda. So. Moving to new business, consideration of approval for purchase 3 Bullard thermal imaging cameras. Chief Walker did quite a bit of work on this. He had this recommendation. I'll let him kind of speak on a little bit. I will note that Commissioner Curry actually might have another option he'd like us to look at. So from the staff side, we always want to look at everything. So if there is something out there that we're not aware of, we don't have a problem tabling this if it gets us something. So Chief Walker, you mind just speaking on our thermal imaging cameras real quick?
As you already mentioned, basically, we got 2 of them. They are over 20 years old at this point. Still working, which is impressive, but not very well. We'd like to get 3 of them on our first operating. We basically asked Ellen Curtis, which is where we buy most of our supplies from. There's another associated source well, which means they're government pricing, which takes some of the work out of what we have to do as far as bids. We asked them basically their 2 cheapest, expensive picks, and have it here for about a month or 2 on the rigs. Asked them for a bid on this was the most inexpensive one. Response is technology is changing rather rapidly, so you could spend $15,000. These are relatively simple. We'd like to get 3 of them for our rigs. Along the lines of having them be the same. Probably retire, too old to have a so we're asking for the head of this, but I understand you have something else to do.
I'd like to have, he's actually my neighbor, he's not involved in developing these things, or he just showed me what they're capable of doing, and I was really impressed. Of course, didn't take much to impress me. We would still use horses when I was.
I was just gonna say.
That's come so far, but what he showed me was a device that allows you to see through smoke. I mean, you have visibility when you go into a fully charged room with it, as well as thermal imaging. You get the outline of the bodies that are there. Degree of the fire temperature wise on there. I don't know how the units work that we've got now, or how much.
So these ones we're looking at, they do all.
Is that right? And the cost per unit on these?
Ones we're looking at is 34.
Okay. On these units that I was shown, they're right around $1,000 a piece. And before we made any commitment on something like that, I'd like to have them do a demonstration for us next meeting. And we could compare, and you would be the one that would, have a last vote on, is this better or the same, or
That's one question. Are these designed for firefighter use?
they are. They come from the military, but they're usable for the fire department. And as I understand it from Mark, there's a number of fire departments that have them, these units now, and are very well pleased with them. So if it would be okay, we just hold off on approval of the purchase until next meeting, when we get a chance to see these other ones, and then get your input into how they compare. I mean, the same, better, indifferent, whatever. And I don't need to be stepping on.
And you're not, so Chief Walker and I spoke on this after you mentioned that to me. We're replacing a 20-year item. So 1 or 2 months to do a little bit more research is not going to hurt. So yeah, absolutely. If there's something that you have, if you could contact me for the next board meeting so we can get that presentation on, it's, well, we want to purchase the best equipment for our people, especially if it's, a better price. And this is a field that is moving at an incredible rate. I mean, if you look at, I'm guessing, Bob was here 60 years ago and we got the first ones. They cost about $40,000. So the reality is, it would not surprise me if these things are, if you have some other.
Some of you guys are not old enough. So you
These
think
things
you
are
should
all,
walk
I mean, you can buy a $300 attachment for your iPhone up to, like I said, size 15 grand. So they're all-
the first portable calculator I ever saw when I went to college in 1972 cost $200. All it did was add, subtract, multiply, divide, and you had to plug it in, right? And now, 5 years later, they're giving them away in cereal boxes.
Yeah.
So,
They were decided to iPad.
right, yeah, it's pretty much
I would make a proposal to the board that if that's the direction you want to go, to have them bring in another, item, then rather than wait until next month to have a presentation to us, to expedite matters a little bit, I would suggest that it might be more time efficient to have a presentation made to staff before next month, and then staff can come to us with the recommendation at that point.
make that sense.
So, and I'll be honest, many manufacturers, I simply went with our trusted supplier, their recommendations, the cheapest one. Bullard is the same manufacturer, as the one we've had for now over 20 years. But I have no problem. Okay, all right.
Now, I have two more things. Number one is, I don't have the brochure in front of me, but I thought I remember seeing that each one comes with 2 batteries.
2 batteries and a truck charger. So I mean, there's
Right,
other parts
so,
and
yeah,
pieces
right. And just for the board's information, the old bollards that we're talking about, the blue ones, were actually donated to this department by Dave McCoy back in, I don't know, 93-ish or something like that, 94 maybe. So that's the history of it. But it's time to replace and move forward, so.
All right. Well, my neighbor is part-time resident up here, so he was planning on being up here for the next meeting. I'll get hold of him and see if he can't come up earlier and we can, as a group, get this thing. It shouldn't take long for a demonstration.
Well, I was gonna say, but even ahead of time, if you can get the information to you
Yeah,
for a demo, I mean, I don't need to be involved in
Yeah.
evaluating
Right.
Bullard versus something else.
One of the spots.
You guys have to use it.
Right, it's one thing to look at the station.
Yeah, because you
I
guys have
really
been,
love to throw out the break for a week.
yeah.
Yeah.
because that's
the
what you
way-
did with these, right? So
Uh,
that's what you did with these, right?
Yes.
So,
So Chief Walker and I will tie in with Roger and figure out the best way to expedite this, but make sure we're looking close. Sounds good. If I could pause before the next item. Bob, do we need to send anyone down to help with the school downstairs, or I know Tyson? Okay, is there, okay, but we have enough to deal with. It's a busy day. We've got a Husky tour of 60 kids going through. And Tyson's pretty tough, so I'm trying to get him some help if he needs it. If
maybe
you
they can
guys,
evaluate the Bullard.
Yeah.
Since everybody else is-
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. More up to date.
so the next item is designation of applicants, resolution for non-state agencies for Cal OES. Caroline can speak on this a little bit, but essentially we have a standard contract with Cal OES that also gets bumped to FEMA. The recommendation is Caroline's taking on some new responsibilities and working through some of that reimbursement from the storm cycle, is changing up our resolution so it includes all the classifications, including hers. We work on it.
So Cal OES, when Bob used to do these, did what was called a disaster-specific resolution, where you would designate someone to speak on behalf of the agency with FEMA and Cal OES for that disaster only. And Cal OES has kind of expanded this resolution, which is great, to allow for a couple of things. One is to open it up to just a general 3-year period of disasters, whether they were federally or state declared. And then they've also expanded, previously we had to designate an actual person as the agent of our agency to work with FEMA and Cal OES on the disaster. So we designated Bob with Alice as a backup. They needed to provide all the documentation. I was unable to step in if Bob was out of the office or sick or there was a deadline. So they've expanded that and said you can choose positions. So I spoke with the chief and his recommendation was to, yes, go with the 3-year period and to designate positions that could speak on behalf of the fire district as opposed to naming people. And so what we did is we put in the fire chief, the division chief, and the administrative aide, which is me. So that'll allow any of us to be able to engage with FEMA and Cal OES and provide documentation, answer questions, and facilitate that grant submittal. Otherwise, pretty standard resolution. It's allowed us a little more flexibility.
So yes, this is basically a boilerplate resolution from Cal OES. The ask is that you move forward to designate the applicant agent resolution for non-state agencies for Cal OES. Brent, if you can make sure that they use the correct language on this, let me know. And I think we're missing Bealer from here.
I moved to what Chief Tomeyer said. That we adopt the resolution.
Second.
Not having to say it erroneously.
Second.
Brent, did you want to comment on the language or are we good?
Say it again. On the approval,
Yes.
On the motion?
no, it's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Beeler, how do you vote? He just walked away and I was looking like. Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mendel, how do you vote?
Okay.
Commissioner Truax, how do you vote?
Yes.
We'll wait for Commissioner Beeler.
I think the motion passes and probably comfortable.
The motion passes and I am guessing it will be 4-0. For now, it is 3-0.
Caroline, you probably have to record that as an abstention or an
But it
absence.
is an absence. Okay,
Yeah.
the motion carries 3-0.
Okay, staff reports.
So just a couple of reports. We'll try to keep them brief. I promised Commissioner Bueller would be quicker. So I'm not even gonna talk on this. I'll let Chief Such speak on the radio system real quick.
So continuing to work in concert with Monroe County's radio consultant and special districts, along with EMS and Town of Lakes and Police Department and Sheriff's Office. Basically, we're currently trying to revise our communication channels or plan what these radios will look like for our department. Full radio order was submitted to the county, and as Chief Meyer hinted at, there will be some budget ramifications for us. We'll probably have to cover some of the additional radio costs. It's not nearly as bad as it could have been. And that, not only does that include us, it also includes Town of Lakes. They'll be picking up a fair share of their apportionment as well. Basically, what this looks like right now is that we'll be able to replace our entire radio fleet. So every radio will have a new side running parallel with the current system. The plan is that once we move to the new system, we will still have the old system in place as well in case things get squirrely.
The only other thing I'd add is we were speaking with Jeff Edelston, the consultant, this morning at about 7. Again, Mammoth Fire took the lead on this initially, and then the rest of the county bought on. He's actually in Inyo County right now, and they're looking at going the same direction. Radios are only as good as the people you could talk to. So this thing is starting to gain some momentum from that perspective, which is positive. Chief Walker, update on water tender 3381.
So 3381 should be done as of today. I'm heading out to South Dakota on the 2nd of August, 3rd or 4th of August for final inspection. All goes well, they will transport it to Burton's. Yes. Where it'll get checked out again. Any luck we'll have it here.
Chief Rooks, update on cell tower.
So we've signed a contract with AT&T. It's a yes, tower there. We've sent them the rest of the documents they requested for just some banking, payment type pieces. The only thing we still have to work out with them, Scott and I, a little more discussion with them. We have towers that's in the way there. We'd like to see if they will help us get rid of that. Maybe they bring the crane in, we can drop that out at the same time, or maybe they'll just do it for us. So at this point, it's gone into planning. I think September is their date.
The goal was September.
Yeah. So for that review, it should really just go through well, though. We have sent some more information to AT&T to help them when they talk to the planning board, which was really the height issue. That seemed to be, if anybody's saying it's 35 feet for that area, we're 80 feet for the tower. They have no problem giving an exemption, but in reality, they can't block. They really can't block, people going in. It's there for them. It says these types of things just have to happen. So it really depends on what the public. That's happening, but
And that last public hearing is in September.
That was the goal by Sandra. Again, Sandra is now moving to the
Right.
county. So Nolan Bobroff has been our lead along with somebody named Michael. So we're making sure that we keep providing the project support from our side. So there's an understanding of that public safety value. Chief Rooks is the lead. He's
Nolan
also,
seemed pretty firm in his thing that they weren't going to change the rules
yeah.
to notice a public hearing 60 days in advance or anything else.
And then Chief Brooks is also taking the lead on making sure we're working with Verizon as well. Again, this only works if it works for the majority of the individuals using phones. Quick update on the Wildland program. I thought it was really nice having the Wildland crew here today, just so you see what it is that we're getting. They've been working their butts off. They're here Monday through Friday, working 10s or Monday through Thursday. with, again, the goal long-term to have coverage every day of the week. And as we get the fire season started, start getting some experience. Right now, the majority of their work has been chipping, but they've started to reach out to other organizations that have collaborative needs, such as White Bark, to make sure that as we look at things like Firewise councils, that we're supporting those efforts. So, sorry, Bob, I probably still have your thunder there.
No, it's okay. Yeah, as you said, Monday through Thursday. And you started off with the original pile burning that we did for Valentine Reserve, and then we moved to meat shipping. The list has grown to over 300 now. And we're continuing to do that. We're gonna have to look at modifying the program needs, so we do other things. They have, we've moved over to Station 2, so during this period, Station 2 is staff during the day on that Monday through Thursday, and we open the doors every day in case Roger drives by.
That's right. Park some cars out there.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so they also adopted Station 2, we worked that out with Scott. They take care of all the daily maintenance, cleaning, we're doing some updates over there. In fact, we have our new Tesla battery system that's installed over there, so that station is on battery backup, but it needs it. And it's been a lot of everything. Every day is training, and it really is a training thing for them. Beginning, they took multiple classes to get certifications to need, but now they have task books that they have to get through that are rather arduous. Those things. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of interesting from my standpoint. It's kind of like putting a new puppy with an old dog, kind of like Roger's got a new puppy with an old dog. So it has a tendency to make it move a little faster than normally is. So I'm trying to keep up with them. The new OES grid, if you haven't seen it, we brought it over. It's downstairs for the bay. If you want to take a look at that, it's pseudo in service. It's just we're having a problem with the radio, but Chief and I have meeting with OES hopefully in the next couple of days to discuss getting that rig out and seeing what they can do to push through getting that one piece that we need.
I couldn't believe that you would ask, it's not on here, but you asked about the chipper.
Yeah.
It's also Bob research, but essentially, there is one additional safety feature that can be had on brand new chippers. It's a knee bar, basically. We have purchased a new chipper with that type of device on it. If you're looking at 7,500. Just you asked last meeting.
Yeah, I did on that. I'm glad that it's got everything but that. It doesn't seem like that would be reasonable to purchase a new one for that extra feature.
Bob had mentioned somebody, they tried some technology where they had wristbands, angle bands, and these went past a certain point, the machine would stop down.
And we were a little different from how you might see commercial crews running. We run a minimum of 3-person crew. One person is always on the safety brake bar, and that is an instant stop for the feed device. So if they see an issue with the people that are loading or anything else going on, they can instantly stop or reverse the drum that pulls the material in. So we're working, at a much safer level than what we saw there.
Yeah. Great. I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
That's the second item on there is summer 2023 town parcel fuel reduction community meetings. This is an important one. So, we've got some really important, excuse the reuse of the word, partners that we work with, and one is White Bark. There's essentially 3 large non-federal parcels in our community. The one that we've been tackling the most is Valentine. There's been a big change in the culture there. The other 3 are Mammoth Creek, the bell-shaped parcel, which is right there at Meridian, correct? And then Camp High Sierra, which is owned by LADWP, operated by the ski area. White Bark, in working the donut project, also felt that it was ridiculous to skip those parcels for just because they're not federal. So they've been working on projects to get those thin. We've been doing quite a few walkthroughs over the last year with them on those projects. And it's really important that as those move forward, they get the support for why that has to happen. It's a little bit of a culture shift as we start to cut down some trees. When you first cut them down, that first impact is usually negative till it gets cleaned up over time. It takes about a year for the trees to grow back kind of naturally to where they should look. So I intend to go to all three of these meetings in the evenings this week. I spoke with Janet Hatfield, who's the executive director of White Park. She said, we're going to have John Wentworth, a couple town council members attend them. I did put the flyer out there. If you're looking to go for a hike in the evening, it's a great opportunity. Again, it's not just these projects, but it's an opportunity for us to voice other things that are important to the district so that people have an understanding of who it is we are, what we have, what we don't have. So like I said, if you're looking for a chance to go for a hike, I will be there, but it is an opportunity to do a little bit of that reaching out to the public and to other agencies. Again, we went to Chamber of Commerce and had some discussions with Edison on potentially moving a project forward. So I know that this is something that Buck has worked with Janet on in the past. So yeah, so it's actually on this flyer right here in the agenda. There was one that was virtual yesterday, but the in-person meetings tonight, there's one at the Bell Shape parcel from 5 to 6:30. Thursday is Camp High Sierra, and then Friday is Mammoth Creek. Mammoth Creek is going to be the most contentious. It's the biggest one that has the largest impact. It's in Scott's backyard. The other thing is that's one where they're really looking at, you've had kind of an encroachment of firs into an area that's actually been an aspen grove. Nice thing about that is once they get it cleaned up, those aspens should thrive and you're going to have a really nice area to walk through. So I intend to go to all of those. Like I said, if it aligns with your schedule and you were planning on going for a walk anyways, might be a great opportunity just to speak with the public a little bit on what the fire district is. And
So Chief Walker, when you and the family are out there protesting, there'll be no one at your house, right? All right, I just wanted to make sure. Board member comments.
I just wanted to mention, and it's a little bit of a conflict with Thursday's Camp High Sierra meeting, but the town is hosting a community housing solutions workshop on Thursday at the Westin from 5 to 8. So I do plan to go, and I think it's in our interest to kind of be on top of what the town is thinking and doing, because firefighters are often mentioned when the town talks about housing.
No, I'm good. I would just encourage you, let's get the yeah, with that, get them out some breaks for a while. Okay. Legal advice.
Nothing new to add. Archie, go ahead.
Other than don't screw up, right?
I will mention, kind of tying into the cell tower. I know there was mention the next step is that it goes before the town for approval, and just kind of a reminder that the state's really going to tie the town's hands as far as what it can do to reject that. It can only be done for safety reasons, pretty much. So just kind of wanted to put that out there so that you understand kind of there isn't a whole lot of leeway for a public entity to reject a cell tower anymore because the state's decided we can't do that. So that's good as far as getting the cell tower through, but I just thought I'd throw that additional commentary on there.
Thank you. Association, anything, Scott, or you?
So we lost. Michael couldn't make it. Tyson was here. He's downstairs doing the ski club. But that being said, there is and we have Fox here. I guess you can represent. There is the picnic is this weekend on Sunday. So that's annual picnic. Food is here, and we are excited and moving forward with that. Anything else, Fox?
It's all over about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a 2 years?
Beer wagon session.
We did one last year, so yeah.
Last picnic last year.
That is all. So what's your backup?
Nice.
Ice, oh, yeah, okay.
Any announcements?
No announcements?
Announcements? Caroline?
This meeting is actually, August 15th.
Sixteenth.
Yeah.
I think it's the 15th.
I apologize, I made that
This
error.
is September.
So, yeah, I was a little jet lagged when I did the agenda. So.
So it'll be Tuesday, August 15th at noon. Does anyone foresee any conflicts?
I will not.
Not be able to.
No, I'm here, sorry. It's the
You
next
are
week,
here.
yeah. The next week.
Caroline?
That is all I have.
Okay, then we will adjourn. It's 1:25. Thank you.
Sorry.